Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anant Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. I'm delighted for this episode of What the Lux to have Tatjana von Stein with us. Tatjana's been designing extraordinary spaces for as long as I can remember. We both started our design careers probably around the same time, been friends for decades. And she brings a unique blend of human psychology and an acute sense of space to each of her projects, and they are fabulous projects. I'm looking forward to getting into them. You've done everything from enviable members clubs to extraordinary homes, and now you've even launched your own collection, which is called Mise en Scène.
Mise en Scène, yeah. This particular collection.
Pronounce it.
Yeah.
Great. We've also taken up residence together by many left speakers.
Yes.
From Brixton to Burning Man.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God.
It's where all the design ideas started.
It's all out of the system.
Isn't it?
It's all out of the system. It's where I've seen many great things in new ways.
I mean, I'm constantly referring to all these experiences, you know?
That last Burning Man was particularly enjoyable, wasn't it? Just before COVID.
I'm not sure talking about Burning Man is a good thing these days anymore.
Fine. We're not allowed to.
I feel like back in the day, fantastic. But I just think right now it's become but we've done, many festivals together. But I do feel like I've learned a lot from those because, you just, first of all, you create these close friendships, you move through the spaces, it's all kind of theatrical. I think I did get a lot of inspiration from those times, unconsciously.
I've had deep insights in those moments, not for, obvious reasons, but actually because of the social dynamics and artistry of the places, and there's something that's deeply tribal within all of us. And when you're on a dance floor for a long period of time, not to listen to a band, but you're effectively listening to sort of drumming or something that's hypnotic that takes you into a state of trance, which is age old. I think you connect with others in a way that is, less narrative driven and more visceral.
I feel like some of my closest relationships and friendships have come from those times, which we still have, us point in case, Yes. I think they're incredibly bonding because you're going through all of these emotions. And both of us were in the music industry at some stage trying to create nights or music nights. And I think...
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. You used to put on, what was your one called?
Simmer. Boiling hot.
I remember we ran them at the same time. Mine was called Disconnect with a K.
Wow, we really went there, didn't we?
And then my girlfriend at the time, Bianca, she used to put one on called Control Alt Delete. It's not healthy to compete with your own girlfriend over.
No, but I do feel that a lot of the sense of wanting to create experiences and create spaces and create moments of connection came from that time. I think that's something we've both taken on in the world of designs in a way. Or maybe there was an appetite early on to do this. It was just manifesting itself in different ways.
It's funny how I feel almost from the same seed, we've seen everything from like Sleep No More through to Secret Cinema, through, there's been such a rise in kind of like heavily invested theatrical experience. Let's go back to, what do you do?
Step one, I run a small design studio. So we focus on interior architecture on one side, interior design, mostly in kind of luxury hospitality, but we also do more residential projects as well now. I'm half French, half German. My team's very international as well. So I think by association, our projects are very global, mostly European at the moment, although we have done the US as well. And as you mentioned, I recently launched a furniture collection a couple of years ago, which is more in the design collectable, line of work, they call them. Although there are big debates about, what are collectibles these days, especially, we in furniture are plagued by functionality, of course.
How many pieces do you make per design?
So the current collection are open editions. They're all signed and numbered. But I'm just working on a smaller kind of capsule collection, which will be limited of 8 pieces only. But, that's a real passion. And it's been a really wonderful positioning exercise as well for us, because we started in hospitality and design. And it takes a little bit longer when you start in hospitality to really get to the luxury levels, which, thankfully now the pitches we're in and the kind of projects we're working on, a big hotel at the moment in Munich, etc., are all really the kind of projects we love, but also very much aligned to our DNA. But I would say that launching the collection was certainly a wonderful exercise to bring us in that level as well, because you're able to I suppose, work in really excellence. The craftsmen we work with are an 80-year-old restoration group in France. They renovate Notre Dame and all sorts of other wonderful, big, kind of iconic places. And I think restorers are really some of the best makers. And I suppose being French, I really wanted to, I think, resonate with my French heritage again.
So you basically design the interior for, epic places, basically, incredible hotels, amazing residential properties. And
it's their full refurbishment.
Talk us through the design process. What happens when, a private owner, maybe it's their vanity project, maybe it's something that they see as an expression of their, life's work through architecture. Often it is the case, with these types of projects where design is really important. I was recently in Mallorca talking to the owner of Cancera. It's more than an expression of design, it's an expression of self. And so how do you go through that process? How do you unlock basically what people are really looking for?
I think there's two different clients, we work with. As you say, sometimes it's an owner-operator, but then we do work with larger kind of more groups as well. And I think they're different beasts in a certain way. I think when it comes to having someone who's an owner-operator, you're kind of going on the journey at the same time and together, because it's their first time as well. And it's, the design process is, I think, partly from a design perspective, we have two roles. One is listening, really listening. The other one is really responding to a space, to a context, to what the brand kind of, or what the operational goals are. I'm talking about commercial, obviously here, what the commercial goals are. There's all of these ingredients that kind of come into a melting point, which is why we really try and bring our clients on this journey. So we very heavily start, you use the word, but on narrative at the beginning. Is trying to understand that, we're not just coming in with a Pinterest image saying, oh, we think this looks good. It's, it's really, it's informed in a way. It's
we always talk about like therapy. I actually believe as we've grown as a business, I think the output of what we do is important, but the input has become even more important, and especially our work is different, but for larger organizations, I always joke that we're like therapists for business.
Yeah. It's the same in interiors. I think even more in private residential, which we do less of. What personally interests me, or what I love doing, is really understanding at all times how we want to make someone feel in it, and how we're incentivizing behavior in it. And which is why, of course, that happens both for residential or residential developments, which we sometimes work with, or, hospitality projects. And I think what's really interesting and poignant this at the moment in time is all of these industries are merging, really, kind of workspaces as we're in want to have a bit of a members club feel, hospitality, workplace, homes, a kind of community building members club environment.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Which means that really, and strangely, our first projects have always been in these kind of flexible spaces. But what's quite interesting is that it means that we're really designing for all parts of you as a person, because actually, one word I use quite a lot with my team and towards our clients, even though it's a different approach every time. It's a different design kind of response. But the approach is kind of the same, which is there's an element of working with human tempo in it, especially in these spaces which are so multifaceted. So, I'm responding to you as a person in the morning, alone, with people, in a meeting, to the evening, socially, because all these spaces are multifaceted now. And it's kind of a question of how I'm moving you gently through a space. And that, really excites me. And I always find it incredibly exciting, incredibly interesting, because that's, I suppose, where we're so linked to the human psychology of it, and but every project has its own response to it. Recently we did a pitch and it's a very gentle movement, from wellness to, it's in this kind of a big resort, and it's a gentle tempo.
Movement through, we actually had one of the directors of Zaha Hadid on this podcast a couple of seasons ago. And, Melody, she spoke through, how they think about fluid dynamic, how do you get, what's your emotional hypothesis and how do you move people from one point to another? And then how do the different sort of strata almost of, obviously in larger spaces, do you know what I mean? Where, how do people sort of move around each other and through each other?
Yeah, I find it fascinating. And also, by the way, designers have different responses to it. I think some designers have a very similar tempo through it because it becomes homogenous. I tend to have a different approach, which is more, I like moving people through different dynamics through the space, but there's a gentle thread that moves you around, because I think we're quite complex as humans, and I think there are lots of different parts of you.
How do you plan that stuff?
it always starts with flow and layout. We very much, I feel like I walk into a space and I see it in 3D. There's something quite intuitive about it. But, as always, as a designer, I think most people, at least for sure, I can say that both for furniture design as well as interior architecture and interior designers, the first sketch you do is the right one, but then you go backwards and it is problem solving. You try lots of things and by the end, you realize why the first one was right, but you have to delete and start again. And I think, we have 20 million. I mean, my floor at the moment for this pitch is just full of 20 layouts.
Yeah. The stakes are quite high with this stuff, because you're like designing something, and sometimes do you have a moment where, I presume you probably move past this after a certain point of doing it enough times, but where you design something and you just, when it comes to life, just
kind of off.
It's just like not, and do you have remit to change things at that point? Or?
Yeah, of course. I think, first of all, on plan is one thing. I think you always have to walk for space. It's amazing how you have to get people out of a computer and just go, right, we've done it. My thought is always to, we go in, we see the sites, we do the narratives, we come up with layouts, and then we walk the layout. And we really start thinking, we start looking at it. And I really don't think there's anything wrong then in kind of doing the old school way of taping the floor a little bit, get a sense of space, But I think, look, our design process is long. It's 2-3 years, So you've got the first months of delivering concepts and design development and initial, all the kind of design drawings. You're always on site. I would say depending on the studio, there's obviously a big percentage of creativity in it. And after that, a big percentage of what we do is problem solving. Up until, the problem solving both of basically trying to stay in line with your initial design intent, that everyone was on board, that everyone signed off, and then dealing with budgets and construction issues and timeline issues and trying to be, arrive over here, having started here and trying to be as close to there.
What's your favourite thing that you've done?
Honestly, I'm very, very excited. I think it's a typical thing. I'm very excited about what we're doing right now. It's always the same thing. Yeah, we're doing a big hotel in Munich, really big. I can't say more because it's still got to come out, but it'll be open in February. So it'll be the largest scheme we've done, and it's just wonderful. I'm just loving the project, and you evolve. I've evolved as a designer. The first few years, because I didn't study design, plagued with imposter syndrome, and now I've really earned my flags. Let's put it this way, and I can gladly say that we know exactly what we're doing, and I think. With time, you just become very intuitive with what's your aesthetic and where you're moving with it, even though it's obviously kind of very personal to the actual project. But there is a project I had loved working on, which was Lalia in a members club we did in Mallorca.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah, I think mostly because it's funny, I was doing a hotel in Zurich at the same time, and take an island, and we sent hundreds of architectural drawings, full refurbishment. It was the most sustainable project we did. And, plans, people are going, what? You're going, oh, right. So you have to be on site at all times, But of course, with chaos comes passion in a way, At the same time, we were doing a wonderful project in Zurich, which we love, but, everything was working more by the clock. So, you're kind of very much working remotely on plans in 3Ds, coming on site. But there's something about this kind of island chaos of having to work things out that was wonderful and very, very sustainable.
Do you use AI in your design process much?
Not yet. I use ChatGPT in terms of kind of presentation structures, etc. But it's certainly.
Oh, we've developed a curriculum on using it for creativity. You should.
Yeah, no, it's something I mean, to be honest, we're a small team.
Our team should do it to your team.
Yeah, amazing. Please, it's something we need to kind of get hold of it for sure, but we don't yet. I think.
I mean, it's very, very useful for built environment stuff.
Yeah.
Conceptualization. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, and now we're seeing, a slew over the last couple of weeks of a lot of ads made entirely with AI, and you can actually see how a lot of the earlier glitches and flaws.
I mean, there's no doubt that, it's something that's going to be part of our process.
A lot of what we do is like guest experience, right? Or like customer experience, but then in the context of hospitality is guest experience. And so, visualizing those things quickly is just so powerful because the thing that for us we find is useful is that it gives like a visual vocabulary to those who aren't creative, which actually allows for more opinions in a positive way to be heard and for people to express themselves basically where once they might not have been able to. Yeah. And that's incredibly powerful. So powerful. And it allows us to get to prototype stage fast.
It's so interesting, isn't it, what you do? Because it's clearly so related to what we do. And we obviously have the same approach. But really part of our kind of, if you look at Ariba stages, is kind of stage 1, of the Reba stages. It's really actually an area that you're taking on to a certain extent. And I think this briefing side is something that really lacks in a lot of projects. But most brands we work with don't have that yet. But I mean, the power in it is fantastic, and of course the world of hospitality timelines is yesterday. So, the actually putting, it's hilarious the amount of pitches we get and RFPs we get, and concept stages started 2 months before you actually get the pitch, but the timelines don't change. And the reality of actually putting this wonderful time in with you before just makes it so, researched, I suppose.
Yeah, I think when people ask what we do, obviously this response assumes a level of fairly intermediate to advanced understanding of our business model and how we interface with clients. I say it's three things really. First, I think is really important, which is being able to empathetically articulate the condition of a business. Like, have we actually looked everywhere to describe the things that we believe are relevant? Based on an assessment of the skills within the organization. So like, this is who we think you are today, your culture, your people, your skills, and the value in your proposition as it stands. The second thing I think we have to do is to evangelize on where we believe a business could be in a way that's inspiring and visionary, but that bridges, the ambition of the boardroom with the truth of the cleaner. I always joke that it's like the cleaner or the receptionist who knows the truth of the customer. And the thing that gets a glint in the eye of the person in the boardroom, that person is probably a high net worth or is probably living in a world where they are subject to lots of stimulus that is interesting and they could move their business towards, but isn't necessarily based on the truth of what their business is. And then, once you've been able to describe the current state, you've been able to articulate the future state, your job is to bridge those two states, and so, but I think people forget that, and design is identifying the problem you're trying to solve.
I mean, that's what I always say as well. I agree. And it's so interesting because I find that interior design is such a dirty word. It really...
What's the difference between interior design and interior architecture?
So interior design, which is, what we also do, but that's a good question. And it also depends totally on the countries, But I think interior design can be someone who's a decorator, which I think is an incredible skill, which is really the boxes in and you're decorating finishes, which is, I would say, what we've done for 60 Curzon, a Mayfair development, which is fully in, and they just want us to dress the room. Now, obviously, we do, it's not just paint, you kind of create actual features and so forth, and you add moldings and so forth. Whereas with interior architecture, you really, let's say the hotels we're doing in Munich, you're removing walls, you're doing your small power plants, you're kind of creating a full zoning of the areas and are, I suppose, doing the interior architecture of a building, Interior architects couldn't build buildings, but they can certainly take an empty shell and create rooms within,
If you were to advise a listener to, in London or perhaps other cities around Europe, engage in or make an effort to go to a space, are there any that you're...
to be honest, I wouldn't say one. For me, it's just going to as many as you can, which are very different, from the Barbican to the old school hotels, different countries, etc. I think for me, it's the mix of all of these influences that come together, because then you have different perspectives. If you spend your time and all your hospitality experiences going to different Soho houses around the world, that's not going to bring you a multi kind of perspective on what it can be.
That would be a fairly bleak way to travel.
Yes, but I wouldn't put it past quite a lot of people.
No. I mean, I think like, the power of well-designed spaces is a deeply emotional experience.
I fully agree. That's what drives me at all times. Because we are, as I said, incentivizing behaviour through it and creating moments within it. I think if you're going to leave your home, what experience are you left with at the end?
What do you find is the impact of the space you work in on how you think about things? You work in like a sort of old schoolyard, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I think we're probably an example of spaces we do ourselves. It's a studio, but really looks, you have a desk space, you have this huge sample room, but it really looks like one big lounge upstairs as well. So we're probably a typical, I think we're a response ourselves to what we design for places. It doesn't feel like a studio, but it feels so warm and welcoming. It feels a bit like a big home, and therefore that relationship within the space and the people is the same.
I need to spend some sunny days coming and working from your spot. It's just around the corner from where I live.
You do. You came to the opening, didn't you?
I came to the opening, yeah.
Yeah. But then, there's a dedicated desk space. It's the same kind of psychology we use in other places, There's moments you want to sit at a desk, you want it to feel a little bit more studios. There are moments, we have floor meetings. We're all sitting around the floor kind of discussing things.
If someone wanted to move from providing design as a service into creating a tangible design product, which you've done through your collection, how did you go about it? How do you do it? I guess you already had good connections with the craftspeople who could.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that people design in different ways when it comes to collections. Sometimes it's something they've created. We design pretty much bespoke furniture for all our projects, because
So you're doing it anyway.
we do it the whole time. I mean, the way I learned really designing furniture was through projects, because we try and be as sustainable as we can and as local. So we're really trying to activate local craftsmanship. For example, not the Portuguese, the Mallorcan projects, So you design bespoke, you try and activate local materiality, local craftsmen. And, through different materiality around the world and different artisans you work with, you really start learning materials and form.
How do you go about finding the people? Is it?
That takes a bit of time, recommendations. It's recommendations. You work through it. Actually, social media is pretty amazing for that too. And we very much kind of, when we work with people, we very much champion them ourselves as well, which I know that then people find them. I've been very open about the restoration group we work with in France on our furniture collection. I think it's, that's our way really to be, to kind of, that it's a long journey around doing sustainable work, but I think that's the biggest part we play with right now. But in terms of furniture, honestly, I approach a collection the same way I approached hospitality projects. A lot of people launch their collections based on products they found was a niche that they've designed for a client, and then they kind of sell it on, which is also, that makes total sense because you've seen a gap in the market. From our side, it was both a creative endeavor as well as a kind of narrative-led approach. So I've always been inspired by dance and movement. And, when I saw at Barbican the Noguchi and Martha Graham exhibition and seeing how they really revolutionized the world of set design in dance, it really inspired me to also kind of work with other art forms. So I took dance as a very gentle nod. So the dining table has like dancer leg positions with metal spine insert, and that became a storyline, which we then use in the marketing assets, and we had these dancers, dancing behind kind of 360 pivoting screens and all sorts of things. So that's how we approached it. But then, of course, it's not an easy business. It's something I love doing, but I would say for the design collectible land, on the one side, from a business perspective, you tell yourself, this is great, don't have to get stock, it's made on order. But actually you have to stay relevant, you have to keep showing up. And, there's a serious significant investment that comes with going to trade shows and going and just showing up.
Who are other designers that you love, who have collections that you admire?
I mean, there's Friends, Boss Studios, Giancarlo Valle. There's all sorts of wonderful people who've got design studios, but furniture collections. But you really need a bit of a lot of attention as well.
When you're doing things like designing 60 Curzon, that was one of your recent projects. It's like a sort of £11 million show apartment.
Just Berkeley Square.
Yeah, and it's got, and maybe firstly you could just bring that to life a bit for those listening. How do you balance sort of livability with also sort of aspirational design ethic? How do you ground your work?
I mean, to be honest, I think that livability and comfort is also something that is really sought for in hospitality as well. I think hospitality design has changed hugely to kind of really having comfort levels throughout it. So it's no different in residential. But what's quite special or different in developments, where you really bring to life an empty box into a show apartment to show what it could look like, is you don't actually have an end user yet. You don't have that client, In our instance, of course, Thierry Despont, this was one of his last kind of big Art Deco developments and showcases in London. So we were able to kind of, which is quite a natural line for me anyway, but we were able to kind of hook on this kind of Art Deco heritage of a building. Yet, we had to invent. Like, who's this person living there? Who decides to live in Mayfair? It's probably their second, third home, and you kind of create a whole storyline around it, and then you move through that. And I think comfort doesn't just, in terms of making it a home, it's still a trophy home, isn't it, to a certain extent, So you're really working with sculptural pieces and sculptural environments, but you're also creating a sense of comfort. But I think comfort doesn't just come from how comfortable something feels when it sits at. It's the dialogue between the rooms, it's how you're using a space, for it all to feel really natural, really.
You've done projects in London, New York, Paris, Zurich, Mallorca, sourcing natural materials. I think that 80% of the fabrics were all locally sourced at La Lia weren't they? So obviously you're looking at local materials, you're bringing local culture and design codes into the spaces you create. But that aside, do you think differently when you're designing in these cities, and do you think for different luxury, do you think luxury differs,
100%.
In these places?
I think it's twofold. You have to engage into the local understanding of luxury, and what it is. Luxury in the Mediterranean will feel different, even from a temperature perspective, than in the hotel we're doing in Munich. You're addressing different forms, but at the same time, you're also always, or at least the projects we're working on, talking to an international audience. Because most of these places are also attracting an international, well-curated or well-cultured, luxurious traveler. So, you are kind of, I think you can't just think it from one perspective, which is a local luxury perspective, but you're also looking at it from a perspective of when someone is traveling from afar, they want to feel like they're somewhere local. We don't want to have the same experience everywhere we go, but we're still trying to tick all the boxes what's luxury to us, So you have to constantly find this medium in between ground. And I think what's exciting is actually taking local materials, but not always interpreting the same local way. It's actually giving, at least that's how we approach things, it's giving it a slight international touch to it. So it's reinventing the use of these local materials, I think that's what makes it original then within a space. Otherwise, you're just copying the Balearic look or the look that's happening over there. The whole point is, hey, look, we're finding all these materials, but you wouldn't know, we've transformed them into a kind of different feel and they're reinvented.
And leading the way to define what, based on a spirit of the past, the future of that place how it might show up.
Well, and I think, timeless design, which we obviously always talk about, is a difficult thing and it's a big kind of generic word, But as close as we can get to it or try our best to it is by not setting something too much in time, not in today's trend or tomorrow's trend. And that's where this complexity and layered approach of design, I think, really comes in handy.
It's difficult, this whole thing. I'm seeing the CEO of Kapinski for dinner tonight. And, we've had a couple of pre-conversations about like these exact sorts of challenges, which is like, this sort of, if you're a big group, it's really difficult. How do you balance being local, contextual? How do you bring the spirit of an individual hotel into the service culture and the design codes, but also what's the like common thread that serves ultimately an international customer? Was a hospitality customers always on the whole an international customer? Do you know what I mean? And they exist within a wealth bracket and they seek something from the brand based on its promise, and that promise needs to be, present in its architecture and as well as its service, and it needs to feel local, but it also needs to feel part of whatever the master brand delivers as a promise. It's a very, very tricky balance to get right.
It is, and also we're only one part of a puzzle. Do this is the one thing. We're now putting ourselves forward.
They need to offset each other. Do you know what I mean? Like this is the thing we were talking about earlier, which is how important it is for like everyone to have a voice right upstream. Because it's like between the quadrants of service, and what service looks like. Is it in your face or is it invisible? Between the codes of architectural design and how local is it versus does it represent a broader luxury aspiration that perhaps takes less cues from its local environment versus the brand and its promise, and
there's so many ingredients in it,
but they all need to exist in harmony. But there's an interplay between all of them that
and often, by the way, this I think we've had of this. Interesting, I feel like as we kind of go up in our career, as the studio grows, it's been interesting to me how important it is for me to understand the operation of the service, everything else going around it. Because, I remember designing one of our first restaurants and, it was great. It was all over papers. But then you went there and the service, the marketing, everything was just off. So, you're not in synergy, and I think, we very much are one piece of a puzzle. And it only works when we're all in harmony, from music to uniforms to art to landscaping to servers, technology, everything in it, which is why, we now actually position ourselves or offer ourselves as more of a creative partner as well along certain sides when someone like you isn't on the table, let's say, because I think it does sometimes need just a creative overview to make sure it all syncs to the same narrative.
Yeah.
And that makes a hell of a difference.
Can we talk about taste? Because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and someone wrote some sort of diatribe on LinkedIn or some sort of similar platform about how, ultimately there are there was someone who ran an agency, and they were obviously sort of a bit embittered by what AI is doing, perhaps to their portion of the industry. Fair enough. And they wrote something about how not everyone has taste, and taste isn't something you can buy. And it sort of got me thinking, and I was like, I think that simply put, something we've always overlooked as business is what we deliver as taste. And often, if you have fairly good taste, you sort of don't recognize that as being a valuable thing that comes, to your point, intuitively. It also just got me thinking of like, who is anyone to define what good taste is anyway? No. I mean, everyone's got taste, and presumably they quite like what they like, and their taste is good in the context of their world.
I mean, I actually talk about this a lot as well, because I think it's about, managing your own, or kind of getting an understanding, therefore, where there's a natural synergy with your client, because you have the same taste levels, or you have the same synergy in how aesthetic, how you're looking at things.
It's really about alignment, isn't it?
It's alignment, but I think, I always talk about taste being subjective rather than kind of good or bad. And I think, there are certain things I see that other designers do, which I'm like, this is amazing. I wouldn't be able to think like this, but it's amazing. It wouldn't come out of my brain, but it's amazing, And I think it's really about having aligned interests. Yeah, it's aligned, there's an alignment. So I think some people have bad taste. I think it's less about bad taste, just not being interested in design. I think they're two different things. But I actually disagree that you can't learn it. I think the more you surround yourself by something, the more you can become attuned to it, and the more you start seeing it, which is why even when, as I was saying, when we start kind of designing narratives or kind of pitching in ideas and so forth, there's reason to the method in a way, Even us, when we're proposing things like, we're going through all of the different motions to then go, yep, this one just feels right, but because everything else didn't. So it's not just,
Yeah, taste, it's a funny thing.
It is.
Everything is, personal, really. With any design sort of offering, I think that what you can rush past at the beginning when you're eager to start something is just alignment, and figuring out inventive ways of breaking the ice on alignment, and we spend a lot of time now doing that, which is like, how can we not really be complacent about what we believe our clients or those we work with think they want, or, even bring the biases of definitions of terms.
Yeah.
Like what does elegant mean? Elegant means two different things to different people, for example. And so it's really trying to find creative ways of getting to the heart of what those things really mean. If you go in strong and you're aligned, as a client, then you truly become a partner. But it's just when you're not aligned, it's when you go in to present and you just suddenly like, oh, is this actually what they're expecting? And then the problem is you end up in a relationship which is subservient to a projection of what you believe the other person might like, rather than having a confidence.
To be honest, I think the problem with that is when there's suddenly a lot of input, and that's because there's a misalignment at the beginning. I think you lose your creative thought as well. You suddenly get a bit lost in it, And I think I personally believe when it's too prescriptive, I think getting a design firm that's creative is maybe not the best thing, because they get lost in it. I think getting, there are also executional teams, which are there to kind of take
I think
a thing.
There's a very big difference between creative design and implementation.
100%. And I think some clients need different things, and if the guidelines are very, very, very prescriptive, it's nearly like, well, why get a creative force around it, And when I say creative force, I mean a team, Yeah. And I think a lot of when, we work with design managers, obviously often within kind of bigger groups, when you're delivering, and they know that and they see that. They see that if it becomes, because let's put it this way, when you put a presentation to all your friends and you say, can you have a look? Everyone's going to come back with notes because you actually think that's what's being asked of you, Yes. There's always room for feedback. But and I think, to be fair, on the flip side of that, I think the feedback is amazing. Like I remember at the beginning, first jobs, when someone said, "Oh, I don't like this," I'd be like, "Oh my god."
No, but there's a really important point in there that I think anyone who works in a creative business should pay heed to, which is the psychology of how you solicit feedback is really important, because people, if asked for their opinion on something, especially if it's subjective, will give it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a power move.
And sometimes it's a power. Often they'll feel quite complimented. They've been asked, or they'll want to. Like people like to express their tastes, and so when you're asking them about something that's fundamentally to do with their taste, people will fill the gap.
But I think this is where it's important to, because I don't think it's about being a diva, and going like, this is what it is. I think you bring them on board by showing certain options, but you're behind all of those. Do you know? So it's kind of bringing people on board because it is a creative expression, and often it's something people really enjoy being part of, and they want to be part of, and they want to feel a sense of ownership for the end product as well. So I think it's bringing people along and letting them go, look, this is why we've created a couple of layouts, there's this and that, and this is why we did this, and trying to bring them on board really. And honestly, you also have to be able to let go. If a client goes, yes, but I actually really had the idea of this. If it's a great idea, amazing. Best ideas on the table, I think we have to be fluid. I think thankfully at this stage, I don't think our studio is lacking of ideas, So, okay, if this didn't work, let's keep moving forward. So I think it's really a combination between listening, but also, like you say, having a sense of boundaries around it.
We always ask our guests the same couple of outro questions. The first is, what would you change about your industry?
I think the resourcing thing is a big problem. I really do. And I think in the world of projects, I think there's something, I wouldn't know how we change it, but it's something that does need to be addressed, I feel. And on the other side, I do sometimes wonder whether, this might shoot me in the foot in, say, 10 years, but I do wonder whether the industry needs to be a little bit more regulated sometimes, because I think I'm a strong believer in alignment. I'm a strong believer if we have the right people for the job and we've done the right experience and there's a right dance between client, you're the right people for the job. And I think this aspect of fees and competing on fees, I just don't believe to really be integral, to really have the integrity kind of, winning something based on fees doesn't feel right to me, because I think most of the times you're pitching based on resource and time you're assuming it's going to take you. But actually, in the end of the day, those fees have already been budgeted for, And I think if there's a transparency about that, and you would be able to respond how within this fee that they've allocated that fits their budget, what we could offer for it.
How do you quote for things? There's a design fee and then an implementation fee?
No, so we follow the Ariba stages. So we have different fees for different stages of work. So the first 3 stages are about kind of heavy lifters, and then we become more
consultants.
Pretty much, up until the final end.
Okay, like guardians of
design guardians,
delivery.
really.
I think the whole process of pitching and time-based fees is, it's endlessly talked about in all creative industries. I think that we'll try and think about everything in our business as value and risk. And so, how does your process mitigate against what the cost of things going wrong would be, and how do you quantify that and then serve your fee as a portion of how you defend against things going wrong, right? Which you could find cheaper solutions, and think about the risk of something not going quite right would be introduced into the equation. And similarly, if you get it really right, what is the value that you create? And I think that creates a sort of headline of what success looks like that's healthy to begin with.
But that's the only difference there is that often certain budget, when it comes to commercial projects, they have budget. There's fit out and there's a proportion of it in advance,
and that's okay too, to work backwards from what there is.
But that's what I mean is, I think sometimes in certain clients, I think having a transparency of what is allocated in their budget, and then, as you say, you kind of proportion to it. If we're right once, that's what we can offer.
Yeah, what I don't like
because I think the pitching behind closed doors.
The whole competitive pitching environment. It's just like I'm not here to be part of a game show.
Well, this is what I'm trying to say.
It's just like, if you want good work and it's people who are too deep in their jobs or in a system, and that's what they do. They run like a fair competitive bit, but it's like, just figure out what the best fit is going to be. And arm people with the information required to
I think so.
Provide a good response,
And then you can work within those parameters, and either we can or we can't deliver within that.
What most concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation?
I mean, I feel like there's so many things we're doing at the same time. I think between war, AI, climate, I think it's coming from us from every angle, at the moment, financially and so forth as well. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what's going to happen from a point of connection between humans. In the future, we're so into the idea of creating spaces right now. When I look at it specifically on what we do, yet everything is becoming so digital. It'll be really interesting how that creates.
I think it will increase the value. I think spaces will need to encourage people to connect just through their design. And I think things like biophilia and, basically how we bring, sensory elements or encourage sensory, use sort of stimulus to encourage the senses, let me put it that way, will become more important in a world.
Well, and I think, to be honest, that's kind of what's happening now anyway. That's why, so many people are working from home right? Part home, which is why so many of the spaces we're creating are becoming multifaceted,
I mean,
because
think
they're
of
the
those-
only play of
think
connection.
those like strip light office blocks of yesteryear, you know,
Yeah, they're gone.
that our parents would have probably all worked in.
But, you know, their boundaries would have been clearer of work play.
Very true.
So I think that's why it was a section of portion of time and goes on. Now our worlds are doing this, you know, especially in places like the UK, I'd say, which is particularly entrepreneurial, you know.
If you had to give up your job tomorrow, which is something you've done before, what would you do?
If I had to give up my job tomorrow, I mean, I'd probably spend a portion of time looking at some tomatoes grow, and then I would realize that really I'm a designer and creative director again. And then I would ask myself, am I going to do this again on my own?
So you'd have a foray.
Or will I go and work for someone?
You'd have a brief foray into foraging before returning back to where you started.
I'm watching a few grow in my garden right now, can I just say? But yeah, I probably would. I'd have a moment up a mountain somewhere.
And then just to end, Tatjana, what's the most exciting thing for you in the next couple of years?
Well, I've just turned 40, so this is my time of not giving a shit.
When do
So
you
I'm
turn 40?
very
Thanks for the
excited about
invite.
that. I haven't done a big party yet. End of May. So I'm very excited about that. Do you know, I feel like there's something about the 40s and women. It's a new era. So I feel like, you know, on a personal note, this is what I'm channeling. On a professional note, you know, you spend some time building showcases and building a portfolio because our projects take years. And suddenly, you know, we're in the room of pictures of projects which are just so close to my DNA, which feels incredibly motivating and exciting. You know, we're excited about this big project coming up in February. And I think both as a designer, but also as a creative, I feel like lots of new doors and movements are opening, you know, which will be cool. And I think, I don't know, something's shifting as well. It's over the last few years, but it's getting stronger and stronger of really, you know, I'm really excited about nourishing a team and empowering the team within, you know, and pushing people in there.
That's a lovely place to end. Thank you so much for your time. It's been
Thank you
a
so
joy
much for
to see
having
you.
me, and you.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at Matchreform, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matchreform.com and chat to one of our consultants.